Ken Marcus is the founder and chairman of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. Ken, always good to see you. Do you expect that the universities have now turned a new page? Will they control these demonstrations more? Do you expect a simmering down of this, or have they not learned their lesson?
Good to be with you again, Eric. Unfortunately, I do not believe that they have learned their lesson. The problem is not just about protest. Everyone has a right to speak freely. The problem is with criminality, whether it's vandalism or assault and battery. Some colleges have done relatively well when it comes to what's called time, place, or manner restrictions. Others haven't done well at all. But even the best of them are merely managing symptoms. None of them is addressing the underlying disease. None of them is addressing how it is these institutions have come to the place where students want to carry flags of a terrorist organization like Hamas. It's not just a question of whether the students will engage in vandalism. It's a question of how these universities are miseducating the students to the point where this is considered to be normal.
What are they doing wrong? I mean, we had 13 federal judges have announced they're not going to accept Columbia University law students as their law clerks because they say basically Columbia is not properly educating the future leaders of our country. What do you see that's wrong in their curriculum, and what should they do to change that?
And the judges are right to say that. Look, there are some universities that are doing some things right that should be replicated elsewhere. Virginia public universities are relatively good, for example, instituting bans on masking in public places, instituting rules regarding the definition of anti-Semitism. We've seen New York University done a good job of explaining that sometimes restrictions on Zionists mean a restriction on Jews, and that should be considered discrimination. But at many universities, including Columbia, we see Middle East studies professors and others who are misusing the curricula in ways that propagandize anti-Zionism and sometimes anti-Americanism. When you have year after year of students being indoctrinated into anti-Semitism, you shouldn't be surprised when the students start listening and acting in ways, sometimes violent, that are actually consistent with the teaching.
Here's what the acting interim president of Columbia, Katrina Anderson Armstrong, says, saying, quote, President Armstrong says, I deeply believe in the values of free speech, open inquiry, and rigorous debate, but those rights cannot come at the expense of the rights of others to live, work, and learn here. Free from discrimination and harassment, our rules have been devised with this balance in mind. This comes after, there's a shocking 91-page report at Columbia that showed that students were chased, Jewish students at Columbia, chased in dorms, spat on, pushed, pushed to the ground, that they were attacked, Israeli flags burned, and this sort of thing. Do you think that some of these students and activists will listen?
We know that they won't, and give Columbia some credit for a report that gives transparency to what the students have been facing. The fact is that there are students facing similar problems at many colleges and universities around the country. But while the report is good at providing transparency about the horrendous problems, students being harassed, spit on, jewelry pulled off, it's much weaker when it comes to finding very specific solutions to what they're going to do on that campus. This is not what we're seeing at Columbia, and it's not what we're seeing elsewhere.
And finally, Ken, your thoughts. September 11th is next Wednesday, and on Thursday, one of the activist groups is calling, on September 12th, is calling for a national day of action, saying the Intifada continues. The day after 9/11. What's your reflections on this?
Listen, if anything, we need to make sure that we use this commemorative or Remembrance Day to remind ourselves not to look aside and to realize that what we learned on October 7 is that there is evil in this world and even in this country that we hadn't realized. We need to take the opportunity to remember it and to take action. The fact that there are some who are obscenely celebrating the anniversary of October 7 should redouble our resolve, not just to make a few speeches or statements, but actually to look inward and to ask the question, why is it that we tolerate institutions that continue to teach anti-Zionism, anti-Americanism, and hate, creating another generation that will not only be anti-Jewish, but will be unreliable when it comes to the question of how can they take on the responsibilities of citizenship. Our democracy is at stake when students are being taught to love Hamas and to hate our friends around the world.
Ken Marcus, who's been working on this issue diligently for the past year plus and is dedicated to this. Ken, good to